Okay, so yesterday we began Masechta Nedarim. We said that our Masechta deals with Nedarim that a person makes regarding making things usher on himself. Usher on himself. A neder is where he makes the object usher. In the lashon of Chazal, an isser cheftza, an isser of the object. A shvua would be the isser of the gavra in the lashon of Chazal, the isser on a person. So I can go ahead and asa that painting behind me one of two ways. I can say that painting's usher to me. That would be a neder. I'd say I'm usher to have enough in the painting. That would be a shvua. It's a gavra. It's a neder. It's a shvua. And we'll see throughout the Masechta the distinctions. We did mention there's three ways that a person can speak about a neder. You can go ahead and have the ikar neder, which just says, as I just said, that paintings usher upon me, or using the lashon of a kinoi. A kinoi is literally a word that is a substitute for a isser. So, for example, a carbon is something that's usher. The word koinim or koinich or koinis would be a kinoi. We'll see a machlokas later on in Daf Yud, exactly whether it's a it's the way the world at large speaks. In other words, in English, as I'm speaking in English now, so anything that would connotate isser, let's say the word hot would mean that thing's hot, that's us, or that thing's hazardous, right? That would be meaning that's a word telling me to stay away. Or no, it's a lashon that the Chachamim came up with to connotate isser. That would be the machlokas between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. So one way to make a neder is through the regular way called ikar neder. One way is through a kinoi using the special shonos. Another way would be called a yad, where a person says something and the implication of it, even though he doesn't say it explicitly. So, for example, he says, "I'm separate. What I eat from you, I'm separate from. What I eat from you, I'm distant from." These are lashonos that are a yad. A yad is the handle, says the Ran. When you pick up a pot, you pick up the handle, the pot goes along. So by using the lashon of the yad, the thing goes along. We had the lashon of yad by a tumah v'taira. You have an apple, you have the stem of the apple, it's the yad of the apple. So those are the three ways for a neder to work. It either works through ikar neder, or it works through the kinoi, or it works through yad. And that's primarily what we've been discussing until now. I skipped in my Hakdama something I thought is very important. I mentioned it's quite unbelievable that a person with his mouth has the capacity to make something usher. Now we all know as Orthodox Jews, we can't eat pig. From the beginning of time, the chaza treif is something we know from you're born from the womb, and the first word out of your mouth is chaza treif. We know chaza is treif. That's the way it is. Chaza is chaza. You have the capacity to create chaza. You can go ahead and say, this thing is us upon me. Now, you can't say it's us upon me like Chazer, because that's, again, that you didn't create the Yisr, Hashem did. We'll discuss that also. But I was thinking like this. I shared this with my Chavrusa, and Baruch Hashem, I heard in the Mishnah of Rav Aaron Kotler Zatzal in his Akdama to Masechta Nedarim said a similar concept. In the Torah, in last week's Parsha, we have three objects that are described as Nefesh Chaya. On day 5, the fish and the birds. On day 6, the animal kingdom. And on day 6, Adam. But when it says, when Onkelos goes ahead and translates what exactly is a Nefesh Chaya by fish and birds, he simply says, Nafsha Chaysa, meaning Aramaic. We just added the aleph. He's just translating. You know what a Nefesh is? It's Nafsha Chaysa. By the animal, the exact same thing. What's a nefesh? It's nafsha. What's a nefesh chaya? It's nafsha chaysa. However, on the pasuk, vayitza Hashem Elokim Adam afu min Adamar, vayipoch ba'apav nishmas chayim, and he blowed into Adam and nishmas chayim. Says Onkelos, not nafsha chaysa. He says ruach memalala, a creature of speech. Ruach, a spirit, memalala, that speaks. Nimsa, the distinction between the animal kingdom and man is man's capacity to speak. Now, we all know speech is an expression of our intelligence. Unfortunately, sometimes the other way around as well. But speech is what distinctly makes us what we are. It reflects what we're thinking. Your speech, that koyach that you have is kaviyachal, it's a spiritual thing. It's the piece of Hashem that's inside of us. The nafsha by yibach ba'apav, Hashem blew inside a piece of himself. It wasn't created from any material. It came from Hashem itself. Our speech is a spiritual thing. That spiritual thing has the capacity to create Issa. That spiritual thing has the capacity to create Issa. It's a phenomenal thing to think about. Your Dibur can create Issa, like Hashem created with the Dibur. You with the Dibur can create Issa. And that's what Nedarim and Shavuos is about. The capacity to create something with your mouth. It could be either als neder, als shua. Okay, that was really the component of the hadam I wanted to, that I missed on yesterday in my haste to take care of things that I was involved with. Now let's go through the Gemara outside what we did until now, because we left off in the middle. The Mishnah began kol kinuyei nedarim nedarim v'charamim v'charamim v'shvuas v'shvuas v'naziris naziris. Anyone using one of these lishonos regarding a neder, it's a neder. Regarding cherem, meaning it's asa to me on like cherem, like something's doomed. Cherem, shvuas k'shvuas. Good. Now, and naziris k'naziris. The Gemara then, the Mishnah then said, Ketzad, example, Mudrani, and it goes and explains yadais. It explains a yad. This is whatever I can eat from you is distance from me. And speaking one of the others mentioned, the Gemara asked Akasha, why by us does it say an arichis of neder, cherem, shvuas, naziris? Yet the same Mishnah in the Sefta Nazir just says kol kinuyim naziris k'naziris, and promptly begins to explain naziris without mentioning cherem, shvuas, or nazir. And the Gemara says, by us, we're compelled to say two things. Since the pasuk that teaches me nidre iser is ish kiyida neder oy shava shvua lesser isha al nafsho, the pasuk in Parshas Matos. Therefore, since it says neder and shvua in the same pasuk, we put it together. Now, once we mentioned shvua, we schlepped along cherem and we schlepped along nazir. The Gemara asked if the whole reason you're mentioning all these four things is because you mentioned two together, nazir and shuas. So why do you stick cherem in the middle of nazir and shuas? We said because not nedarim and shuas, because nedarim and cherem are both isser of the chefza of the object, whereas shuas and isser of the gavra. Now the Gemara says you began with kinuyim and you begin yadais, one kasha, and secondly, who in the world knows there's such a thing called a yad? You never mentioned it. You beginning to explain something that you didn't mention. You just mentioned one thing. You mentioned kinuyim, and then you explain yad. Two questions. One, if you mention kinuyim, you should explain kinuyim and not explain yadais. And zweitens, yadais, what is a yad? Where do we mention something called a yad? Right. So the Gemara answered with missing words. Here's what you should say: kol nedarim kenedarim. The kol kinuyim nedarim kenedarim. The kol yadais nedarim v'nedarim. And every yad, so in other words, once I put the word yad in there, memela, I can explain it. So the Mishnah was missing words. We add the word yad. Now we're explaining what yad, and now we're explaining yad. So now we're next to the next logical question. If you mentioned one kinuyim first, and then you mention yadais, why are you going to begin explaining what you mentioned last? Why don't you go back and explain what you mentioned first? And that's where we're holding on Daf Beis, on the Beis. We're holding over there. Says the Gemara, how many lines down? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 lines down. Fred the Gemara, V'lifrush kinuyim bereisha. Since you began the Masechta Kol Kinurim and then you mentioned Yadais, why don't you go ahead and explain? Why don't you go ahead and explain kinuyim first? And for the Gemara, Hahu desolik minei, Hahu mefarish bereisha. That we left off with, number B, we're explaining first. And now the Gemara will cite examples of that fact. What we left off with, we're explaining first. Kiddet nan, like we learned in the Mishnah. Bame madlikin, what can you go light with on Shabbos? Ubame ein madlikin, what can't you? Now, what does the Mishnah say? Ein madlikin. So we go back and explain number 2, B. Kamet bamat taimnim, what can you insulate with on Shabbos? Ubama ein taimnim. And what can't you insulate on Shabbos? Ein taimnim, and we're explaining what we left off with. Ein taimnim. Number 3, b'ma isha yotza, what can a woman permitted to go out with on Shabbos? Ub'ma ein yotza, and what is a woman not permitted to go out with Shabbos? Lo seitze isha, and we go ahead and explain what we mentioned last. So very good. I have a source. Kol kinuyim v'nedarim, v'chol yadais nedarim k'nedarim, ketzad, and you explain yadais. And it's not a kasha. Why don't you explain kinuyim? Because in fact, we find you could explain what that you finished last with first. Says the Gemara, you mean every time that what? That anything you begin with loy mefarish bereisha, you do not explain? In other words, you're saying, for an example, mashma, you always explain the latter. 1, 2, and explain 2 first. And you cited. I will cite now Mishnayos where what you did mention first, you did explain first. Number 1, you went back, you said 1 and 2, and then you explained number 1. So your teretz that you're giving now, while you're explaining the others before the kinuyim, is not holding water. Where do you see such a din? Where do you see that what 2 things mentioned, and you're going to go ahead what and pick up a number 2 first, number 1 first? Vatran, the Inyan nachla yesh noichlin umanchilin. There are those who can inherit and bequeath. Noichlin, they can inherit. Right? A woman, she can inherit. A man can inherit, and a woman and bequeath, and a woman not necessarily. They noichlin umanchilin. And now we're going back and explaining noichlin umanchilin. Yesh mutaris labalayim vasuris labaliyameyim. There are certain women. Let's say a man is married to a kohen gadol, a woman is married to a kohen gadol, and a woman is married to a kohen gadol, and now dies. Can't marry to a kohen hedyot, can't marry a kohen gadol, so she's mutter to a husband and also to a yavam. Muteris liyameyim. Let's say a kohen gadol is mekadesha yavama. It doesn't work, but if he dies, she's permitted to the yavam. And we explain, we go back, and explain who's mutter to the husband and also to the yavam. Yesh tuna shemen ulevaina. There are karbonos mincha that require both shemen and levona, both oil and frankincense. Shemen v'loy levaina. Ve'elu tuna shemen levaina. And we go back and explain number 1 first. Yesh tuna sagasha. There are carbon menachas that require putting up to the southwest corner of the mizbeach. The ain't tunas tenufa, but do not require waving. Tenufa require waving. And now we go back and explain the first one. Ve'elu tunas hagashos. Yesh b'chol lenachla. There's a b'chor lenachla regarding inheritance. Ve'in b'chol lekoyin, but there will not be a pidyon aben. That's for example, if the woman miscarries first. The second child, there's no pidyon aben, but the second child will be the b'chor lenachla. B'chol lekoyin, ve'in b'chol lenachla. And now we go back and explain. Ve'ez b'chol lenachla. Ve'in b'chol lekoyin. So therefore, we're asking a question, right? We gave a lot of examples. You want to answer if the Mishnah is saying kinuyim and yadais, and you want to say that what? That first you're going to go ahead and explain yad, because that's what we finished off with. I can just as easily tell you, you know what? No, you should explain kinuyim first, just like we just cited a bunch of places where you do go ahead. So the Gemara wants to now make a chiluk. When do you, in other words, here's the svara, guys. Really what you end off with is the svara, the teretz. 1 and 2, the norm is to explain number 2 first. 1 and 2, the norm is to explain number 2 first. Good? Now, why then all the Mishnayos I just mentioned, do you explain number 1 first? So Halin, again, example of a lashon that you don't find in the Bavli, but in the Yerushalmi, a lashon example of we mentioned yesterday that it's Mishuna, that it's different, the lashon of Nedarim. Halin mishum the abshaloi, those that we just mentioned, that there are a lot of halachis, mefarish hahud the pasuk bereisha. In other words, here's your teretz. Kol kinuyim nedarim nedarim, b'chol yades nedarim nedarim. Ketzad and explain yad. Why? That's the norm. You can just list me a bunch of places where 1 and 2, when you went back and explained 1, that's because 1 had a multitude of halachis. And if we can explain number 2 first, you might make a mistake. That's the way the Ran explains it. The Ran explains it that, again, 1 and 2, why are we going back and explaining number 1? Because of the multitude of halachas that are associated with number 1. I want to go ahead and explain it so it shouldn't be forgotten. That's the teretz. So you have a good teretz right now. The problem is, we're going to question that. Fred the Gemara, what is an animal permitted to go ahead? Right? On Shabbos, you mitzvah not to go ahead and work your animal. And that includes haitzah. What can an animal go out with on Shabbos? What can't an animal go out on Shabbos? Now, there are not many halachas associated with this, but guess what? The loyavsha, the ketani, yoitza gomel, the gomel goes out. So in other words, here's 1 and 2. There's not halachas associated with number 1, and nonetheless, we're going back and explaining number 1. So therefore, the same thing by kinuyim v'yades. So your answer that you gave is not viable, because again, 1 and 2, 2 and 1. So the Gemara says the obvious answer. It says the lav dafka. Ella lav dafka. It's like lav dafka. In other words, don't get caught up in this. Sometimes we explain one first, sometimes we explain number two first. And since that's the case, in our Masechta, we decided to explain number two first, Yodais first. And we have places that we can cite that we explain number two first. There are places where you cite number one, you explain number one first. There are places where you explain number first. It's not a svara. The svara of Avsha Milsa that there's more halakas is not a good teretz. It's simply dependent upon, contingent upon lav dafka. So ela lav dafka zimnim mefarish hu de pasach bereisha. Sometimes we'll explain number one first. The zimna hu de solik mefarish bereisha. Sometimes we'll play number two first. That's the first teretz. That's the first teretz. V'boy yisema, the second teretz. Now this teretz really this teretz, I think that it means that really normally you should explain really it's lav dafka. Really it's lav dafka. But sometimes there's a reason. In other words, if you can't find a reason, then it's lav dafka. But sometimes there is a reason. And our Mishnah there is a reason. Our Mishnah there's a reason. What's the reason? Our Mishnah is speaking where the whole din of Yad was learned out by the Chachamim. We've had in Shas, Milsa, the Asilei Midrasha Chavivale, something that the Chachamim darshan themselves was more dear to them than a plain open halacha stated in the Torah, because that they derive through their own exegesis. I think that's the term, right? They add their own koach, and therefore was very dear to them. Kinuyim, it seems to be deraisa. Kinuyim seem to be straightforward deraisa. We're going to ask a little question that, but Yodos is learned out, is derived. Since Yodos was derived, therefore what? It was more chaviv, and therefore they listed it first. Says the Gemara. Fiba Yisema. Yodos, Aidi da'asi midrasha. Since the Yodos you learn from midrasha, mefarish lahon bereisha. We explained them first. Okay. Now you got a very good question. If it's so dear to you, why did you begin the Masechta Kol Kinuyim Nedarim Nedarim? Why don't you begin the Masechta Kol Yodais Nedarim Nedarim? The Kol Kinuyim Nedarim Nedarim. So not only is it Chavivis in terms of explanation, you mentioned it first. That would make a lot of sense. If you're telling me it's so Chaviv, why don't you list it first? Read the Gemara, the Lifta Chadein Bereisha. Go ahead and learn Yad first in the Reisha. Says the Gemara. Niftach pasuk kinuyim de'araisa. We first mentioned kinuyim, which are de'araisa, bereisha, v'hadim mefarish yodais de'aslei midrasha, and then we explain yodais that come from midrasha. Good. Okay. Now I'd ask you just to turn to Daf Yud Amid Aleph, guys. Daf Yud Amid Aleph. This is important. The Mishnah on Daf Yud Amid Aleph is explaining kinuyim. The Mishnah on Daf Yud Amid Aleph, guys, is explaining kinuyim. So, what would the kinui for a neder be? Ha'omer koinim. If you say the lashon of konim, konach, konas, hari elu kinuyim lekarbon. All of these would be kinuyim to ask something upon yourself like a carbon. Cherek, cheref, cheref, hari elu kinuyim lecherem. These are all terms associated with Issa called cherem. Nazik, naziach, paziach, harieli kinuyim lenaziris. Shavusa, shekuka, noide b'moihi, harieli kinuyim leshvua. So this really is kol kinuyim nedarim ledarim, and these are the kinuyim right here on Daf Yud. Now, where's the source for these kinuyim? You told me it's deraisa in nature. Let's see the Gemara here. Says the Gemara, Itmar, kinuyim. Where do you know such a din called kinuyim? Rabbi Yochanan Amar. Lashon umaishein, says Rabbi Yochanan. These are the lashons that people speak. They call a carbon. This is what they call him. They call it koinim. They call it koinich. They call it koinim. In other words, this is my explanation. Just like carbon is an ikar neder. Remember, there's two ways to make a neder, guys. Carbon, ikar neder, kinoi, yad. If a person would say this thing is usher upon me like a carbon, that's an ikaneder. So the word koinim or koinich is synonymous with what? With carbon. It's no different. It's no different. And just like carbon is the oraisa, so too the kinoi of koinim and koinich is the oraisa. Like Rabbi Yochanan, in other words, it's interchangeable. The goyim call, the umais call carbon koinich. Since they do that, in other words, if I would say in English, this thing is upon me like a radioactivity. Radioactivity, it's like, to me, this is like it's radioactivity. I mean, it's asa, right? It's radioactive. I have to stay away from it. So that's Rabbi Yochanan. However, Rabbi Shlakish says, Loshin shabadlim chachamim. These are the lashonis that the chachamim picked. So this is rabbinic in nature. This is what the chachamim picked. In other words, the chacham said, you say koinim, boom. But not in fact that it means that. They said that's instead of that. So now we have a problem. Like Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara's teretz, why you go ahead and mention kinoi first, it makes sense. Like Reish Lakish, that's the Rabbanon, back to the original question. Mention yad before you mention kinuyim. After all, yad is chaviv because it's a drasha. Let's see it inside, guys. Says the Gemara inside. Hanicha, very good. Back to Daf Gimel. Hanicha, very good. Lamanda Amar kinuyim lashon nachrim haim. Who says kinuyim is the lashon of nachrim? Again, that's Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara said lashon umos, right? Here it says lashon nachrim. A little change in lashon, right? Lashon. It makes sense that it's deraisa because these words are interchangeable with carbon. These are the lashon the chachamim that they chose to make an Nedarim. How can you give a teretz that the reason you learn kinui first is because deraisa? It's not deraisa. So back, what's our question right now? Where we're holding? If you tell me the reason you mention yadais first is because it's more dear to you because you derived it from a drasha, then you should have mentioned it first. A Masechta should have began kol yadais nedarim kinedarim. That's how you should have began the Masechta. And for the Gemara, mi kitani yadais. Did we learn yadais? We didn't mention yadais in the Mishnah at all. We just mentioned what they are, but we didn't see the word. We didn't say the word. V'lav chasuri kol mechasra. Isn't it missing? La. So agdim nami v'tani yadais kol yadais nedarim kinedarim v'kol kina nedarim kinedarim. Okay, so very good shmak, very good teretz. The Mishnah is missing words. We said that because why? We didn't have the word yad in the Mishnah at all, yet we had the explanation of yad. We didn't have the word yad in the Mishnah, yet we had this explanation. So we had to come on to the idea of chsuri mechsera. Please don't do anything. No, please don't do it. So now that you're coming on to yad, right? So watch. Kol yodais, it's missing. Kol yodais nedarim v'nedarim. V'chol kinoi nedarim kinedarim. Kesad, what's considered a yad, and we explain it in the Mishnah Daf Beis and Aleph. And you want to know kol kinuyim? That's Daf Yud. So in Echinami, everything works out. The thing that's most dear to you, you're starting with. The thing that's most dear to you, you are explaining first. And the thing that's secondary in nature, because it's secondary in nature. Because it's also l'chayra, they're both there, they're secondary in nature of kinuyim, because it's not as dear to you. Because why? Because you don't learn it's only deraisa. Memela, you're explaining that in Daf Yud. That's where we're going. So that's the nuts and bolts of the Mishnah, right? That's the nuts and bolts of the Mishnah. Now we said that there's a source for yadais. Where is the source? The Chachamim made a drasha, guys. Where's that drasha? So now for the rest of the shir, we're going to go through the drasha. Exactly where do you know there's such a thing as a yad? Where do you know there's such a thing as a yad? Now, what does the pasuk say in the yadais heichiksiv? Where is yadais? What does it mean? In other words, you just said that you learned yadais from a drasha. Where is that drasha? Where is that drasha that it's so chaviv to you that you learned it first? Where is it? It says we're gonna have machlokes. The pasuk says, "Ish kiyafli linda neder." If a man expresses to make a neder, Nazir lahazir Hashem. He's a Nazir lahazir to express himself as Nazir Hashem. So now we have a relationship juxtaposed to each other, a neder to a Nazir. If you think about it, guys, how you're creating an isser. The Nazir is creating an isser of wine, of cutting his hair and being metam mason. That's an example of your mouth being able to create an isser. Yes? Good. So now, Vitanya, It says nazir lahazir, lasais kinoi naziris kinaziris. Going ahead, why did the double lashon? To say, just like the ikka lashon of nazir would make you a nazir, so to a yad would make yourself a nazir. I would take out the next few words. I would the yadais naziris kinaziris. Take out the word kina naziris kinaziris because we're not discussing kinuyim now. So the yadais nedarim kinadarim. So guys, watch. Good. Ish kiyafli linda neder nazir lahazir. Nazir lahazir is you're going ahead. You're telling me the extra word is teaching me yad. The hekesh between nazir and nedarim will teach me by neder as well. There's such a thing called the yad. The Gemara is going to ask. It has a double lashon over here also. So why do you have to come on to nazir for it? The lashon over here of lindor neder itself independently should be able to create it. Okay, but that's right now what we're saying. So very good. So now, what's a yad? Where's the source for yad? It's the pasuk of Ishki Yafli Linda Neder Nazal Hashem. It says over here Nazal Hazir, an extra letter, an extra word Nazir, one of Nazal Hazir, one for Ikka Nazir, one for the yad, and the Mela, the Hekish too. Nedarim will teach me the same din. So now I know there's such a thing of yad. Where do I know it from? I know it from Nazir. Ainli Elowat Naziris. Nedarim inayim. Tamalainer Ishki Yafli Linda Neder Nazal Hashem. Makish Naziris Nedarim. V'Nedarim Naziris. We're going to go back both ways. Ma Naziris Asaba Yodais Naziris Kinaziris. Just like by Nazir, there's a din of yad. So too, af nedarim asabehen yadis nedarim kinedarim. We'll say there's a din of yad. So that's our source. Now we won't stop there. We're going to go back and forth the relationship between the two. Uman nedarim oiva b'bal yachel u'b'bal ta'acher. Guys, we said yesterday there's two types of neder. There's one nidrei iser and one nidrei hegdish. You make a neder to bring a carbon, correct? With Surah Masechta Rosh Hashanah, you have 3 regalim to go ahead and bring the carbon, right? You have 3 regalim to bring the carbon. Machlok is how the order is, but you have such a limud. So now that's Bal Ta'acher. Bal Yachel is you don't keep your word, says the Gemara. Now we have a very, very good idea. Just like by Neder, it's Shayach the Isser of Bal Yachel, profaning what you said. And just like by Neder, it's possible the Isser of delaying bringing a carbon, Af Naziris. You can be over in Bal Yachel, Ubal Ta'acher. And Bal Ta'acher and Naziris is going to be tomorrow's share on the days. So guys, so far, 2 relationships. Yad from Nazir to Nedarim, Bal Yachel, Bal Ta'acher by Neder to teach me that it's Shaykh by Naziris as well. So we just went back and forth with the Hekesh. Another din. Uman Nedarim. Ha'av meifa nidrei bitoi, as long as she's under his jurisdiction before she becomes a beigeres, and as long as she's an ira, he's able to go ahead and take off a neder. Ubal meifa nidrei ishtoi, and if it's a neder of inui nefesh, right, the husband's able to be made for the neder of a woman. We saw in Masechta Ksubis, right, that Daf Ayin Dalid, it's shaykh to go ahead and take off the neder. Hataris nedarim, hafaris nedarim, the husband's made for become laba. The chonim are ma'akel and mafreya. Af naziris ha'av meifin naziris bitoy ubal meifin naziris ishtoi. Okay, so now you have three relationships. One the din of yad from nazir to nedarim. Nedarim we have 2 din, bal yachel and bal ta'acher, and the din of hafara and just like the husband and the father could take off naziris, so to nedarim, so to they could take off naziris. Good, so far so good. Now. Ma'ishna gabe naziris tichsiv nazir lahazir, nedarim nami haksiv linda neder ve'kesha lamali. Guys, look at me. This all began by the double lashon of naziris, yes? And therefore we said we're learning naziris to neder. Neder also has a double lashon. Linda neder. Okay? Linda neder. Nazir lahazir. Now, there's a little difference, guys. What's the difference? Nazir lahazir. Linda neder, nazir is the noun, lahazir is the verb. Lindar is the noun, is the verb. Make a neder is the noun. Okay. Usually the norm is what? The norm is to say first the verb lindar and then say the noun neder. By nazir, the fact that they switched the order that created the limud. It said nazir, the noun first, then lahazir. Says the Gemara inside. Hashta says the Gemara. Ikas of neder lindor. If it would have said first the noun of neder and then the verb of lindor, kidikasav, it'd be like you'd say that you learn lindor neder, that there's a din of yad. Nazir lahasi kidikaarmit. Like tzarech hakesha. But hash the dichsiv lindor neder, now that it says lindor neder, putting the verb before the noun, right? It says lindor neder. Again, you're supposed to put the noun before the verb. Here you put the verb before the noun. Since the Torah is speaking kalashim b'nei adam, there's nothing to learn from it. So, what was that kasha? You have a double lashon by nazir lahazir, which you're learning out. You have a double lindor neder, which you're not learning out. Says the Gemara, since it's put the noun before the verb, the verb before the noun, it's just the way the Torah speak and people speak, and therefore what? There's nothing to learn, and therefore I had to come on to nazir lahazir, right, to go ahead teach me what, to teach me the din of what of yadais. Now, the islay dibur Torah klashim b'nei adam, very good. That nindo neder is the way people usually speak. Ella laman the leslay dibur Torah klashim b'nei adam. What does he do with it? In other words, the double lashon, despite the fact that people speak that way, the Torah doesn't go and speak in the way. There's a mandiyom who says nothing's extra, and the Torah doesn't speak in the normal way, so there must be a limit of linda neder. If you tell me nazar lahazir is to teach me yad, then linda neder must be time to teach me something else. You can't tell me dibur Torah klashim yadam. So therefore, the Gemara is going to switch gears according to that mandiyom. Maya say Dorishle lasas yadais nedarim k'nedarim umakish naziris nedarim. Now we're going the other way, guys. In the first limud, we went from naziris yad this way. That's the mandiyama dibur Torah klashim yadam. But loy the mandiyama that loy dibur Torah klashim yadam, we're going the other way. We're learning at yad yadais nedarim directly from the nedarim. Linda neder, not only a ikka neder but even a yad. And now we make a hekesh from neder to nazir. So to a nazir, a yad would work. Now that leaves the nazir lahazir extra, correct? What are we going to do with that? Says the Gemara, nazir lahazir darish, right? Malamed amid beis. Why does it come to teach me? Shehanaziris schal al naziris. One naziris is schal on another naziris. Let's see the ran at the top. That's the right side, the ran. Shehanaziris schal al naziris. Kigoyim. The Omar Hareini Nazar Hayoim. Hareini Nazar Hayoim. He says a double lashon. Guys, Stam Naziris is Shloishim Yoim. By Nazir, it says Kodesh Yiyeh. Kodesh Yiyeh in Gematria is 30. Yud Hey is 15. Yud Hey is 15. Yiyeh is what? Is 30. Kodesh Yiyeh. Stam Nazir is 30 days. The Loyar Minan, the Lasagi Labor Shleishim Yom. We don't say if a guy said a double lashon, it's enough for 30 days. El Tzarech Limais Shtei Naziris. Tahainu Shishim. He'd have to go ahead what? And count 60 days. So therefore, I learned that out from Nazir Lahazir. One Nazir on another Naziris. Good. So therefore, I'm learning that according to this pshat, that Mandiyama who says the Torah does not speak in Bnei Adam, the source for Yodais is Nedarim, and the Nazir Lahazir is come to teach me what? Coming to teach me that Naziris is Chal Naziris. Now, the kasher is what? According to the Mandiyama, that the Torah does speak V'lashin Bnei Adam, and therefore, Linda Neder, you're not learning anything from, and therefore you needed to use Yad to teach from the Naziris to teach me Yadois. Where do they know the din of Nazir Chalal Nazir? Since I needed the din of Nazir Lahazir to teach me Yadois, I don't have an extra to teach me. I don't have an extra to teach me the Naziris Chalal Naziris. Well, my Yom Dibur Torah Klashim Yodam, the Nazir Lahazir Dorish Laslis Yodis the Naziris Naziris. Where does that man the know that you say a double lashon naziris that it's chal? Now hanicha very good. He's sphere like man the ain't naziris chal naziris. Okay, very good. Let's say he doesn't hold it in the first place, so you don't need a limud. So he uses nazir lahazir for yadais. I want to use linda neder for nothing. It's okay. Elama isvir like man the naziris chal naziris minale. Right? If he uses what? Naziris chal naziris minale. Where does he know it from? Since he used Naziris to teach me Yadais, since he used Nazir Lahazir to teach me Yadais, where does he know Naziris Chala Naziris? Okay, guys, did you keep the cheshbon so far? Are you spinning? Okay, I'm going to go through it one more time. So name Akra Lizar, the pasuk should say Lizar, My Lahazir, Shmamina Tarti. From here, we're going to hear two things. In other words, Lizar and Lahazir, the Ran explains, mean exactly the same thing. But the norm would have been to write Linda Neder Nazir Lizer. When it says lahazir and uses a different lashon, I guess it looks like there's an extra hay in there. That's to teach me Naziris Chal Naziris. Okay, outside. Let's do it outside. Let's do it outside. The Gemara began. How do you know there's such thing called the Yad? Where do you know Yad is from? We said we have a pasuk. Ish kiyafli linda neder nazal hazal Hashem. Nazal hazir teaches me Yad, and we make a hekesh from Yadais to Naziris, from Naziris to Yad, and from the Nedarim. Just like there's a Yad by Naziris, there's a Yad by Nedarim. And then we go ahead and we throw it back, just like there's a din of Bal Tacher and Bal Yachel by Nedarim, who are din by what? By Naziris. And just like the din of Hafara exists by Nedarim, exists by Naziris. That's great. Good. Fred the Gemara Kasha. If I have a double lashon here, a double lashon here, why did I have to come onto a hekesh? Just why don't you darshan Linda Neder to teach me Yad? Says the Gemara, this goes to Man Yama, who learns the Yad from Naziris. That's the Man Yama who doesn't darshan anything from here, because Tibut Torah Klashim Adam. Good. Fred the Gemara, Man Yama who does say the Torah does not speak that does not speak Lashim Adam. What do you do? So here's what we do. Linda Neder teaches me Yadais. Nazal Hazir, that Naziris is Chal Naziris. Fred the Gemara who used this to teach me Yad, where'd you know Naziris from? Where'd you know that from? Right? Where did you know that from? Where did you know that there's such a din of, says the Gemara? I'll tell you where you know that from. It could have said Lizar. It could have said over here Lizar. It says Lahazir, Shmamin Tarti. So you hear two things. One, you hear the din of Yadais, and two, you hear the din of Naziris Chal Naziris, and you're still not learning anything from Linda Neder. It's all about matter of fingers, guys. Come on. It works, right? Okay, very good, Shema. So let's go right. B'marava Amri in Eretz Yisrael, west of Babel is Eretz Yisrael. B'marava Amri is Tana, the Tana who says that what the Torah does not speak the Kalashim Le'Adam. Right? Is Tana the Mafil Yadis min Linda Neder. That's the man the Amma who says like we did, the same as us, Linda Neder. Is Tana the one who says Dibra Torah and Linda Neder is just speaking like Bnei Adam. Where does he know it from? He doesn't know it from the Naziris guys. Where does he know it from? The Mafik Lei min kol hayoytze mipiv yaseh. Anything that comes out of your mouth, you should keep. Anything that you come out of your mouth, you should keep. So very good. Like the man the Amma that what? That Dibra Torah Klashim Bnei Adam, and you can't learn anything out from Linda Neder. So he doesn't learn it out from the Naziris. He learns it out from anything that comes out of your mouth, you should keep, even a Yad. And Mamela now he has Nazal Hazir to teach me Naziris is Chal Naziris, because he didn't learn anything from that. He learned Linda Neder doesn't teach me anything. Naziris he did not use for Yadais, a complete different pasuk. Nazal Hazir and Kol Asher Yotzim from Yaser teaches me Yadais, and now Lizar Nazal Hazir will teach me that Naziris Chal Naziris. Now going back over the Brisa, according to the first lashon, guys, we said that we learned Yadais from Naziris to Nedarim. Now we said we learned in Nedarim to Naziris that just like by Nedarim, it's Shaykh Bal Yachel, refraining your word, not keeping your neder, and just like Shaykh Bal Ta'acher, delaying your neder, who then by Naziris, it's possible Bal Yachel and possible what? And possible Bal Ta'acher. Now the Gemara's kasha is the following kasha. What would be an example of being by Naziris and not keeping your word? You drink wine. You cut your hair, right? That would be an example. But then you're not only over on Bal Yachel, you're over on Bal Tochal or Bal Tishteh. In other words, it's mashma, it's shaykh to be over on Bal Yachel singularly. How is it possible to be over one and not two? Because by being over Bal Yachel, automatically you're over Bal Tochal. Good? Fred the Gemara kasha, beautiful kasha. Says the Gemara, Omamar. Guys, remember that Masech is the same. Omamar, going back over the Brisa. Omamar. Uma Nedarim, oiva Bal Yachel, ubal Ta'acher. Just like by Nedarim, it's shaykh to be Meichel Neder alone, and only that. Ubal Ta'acher. Bishleim Bal Yachel din Nedarim mishkachas la. Where would you find the din of Bal Ta'acher by Bal Yachel by Nedarim? Kigoin the Omar. Kikazu oichel. This kikar I will eat. V'loy achla, and he doesn't eat it. So oiva mishom Bal Yachel. Then he's over al Bal Yachel. You didn't keep your word. You were supposed to eat it and you didn't. Ella Bal Yachel din Naziris heichi mishkachasla. How do you find Bal Yachel alone and only that? It's easy to be over on my Naziris, but it's more difficult to be over only on one lav. Says Gemara Kiv in the Amma Hareni Nazir, Havli Nazir. Here's the problem. The Gemara is explaining the kasha. Since he says, I want to be a Nazir, Achal, he eats grapes, Kam Lebebal Yochal. So he was over, guys, two things. Shasa, if he drinks wine, Kam Lebebal Yishte. So, and for the Gemara, Amarabba, Lav or Lav Bishnayim, Enachinami. When it's said over here that is over on Bal Yachel, it doesn't mean singularly. It means to be over both of them. It means to be over the Isser of Bal Yachel Debaroi, and it means the Isser being over what? Of not eating or not drinking. Okay, so we finished, we concluded today. We know what kinuyim are, we're not explaining them. We know what yades are. We know there's something by yades by Nedarim, there's yades by Naziris. We know there's a din of Bal Yachel by Nedarim and Bal Ta'achel by Nedarim. We know there's a din of Bal Yachel included of Bal Eichel by Naziris. And just like there's a din of Bal Ta'acher by Nedarim, there's a din of Bal Ta'acher and Naziris. And Be'ez Hashem will pick up this on Motzei Shabbos. I wish everyone a great Shabbos. And thank you for listening.